A racist woman insults a black soldier on a plane. The next day, she sees a news story that turns her world upside down and makes her realize she made a terrible mistake. The wind howled through Denver International Airport, signaling the arrival of winter. Inside, the terminal pulsed with energy. Families juggled luggage and children, business travelers clutched their phones like lifelines, and flight announcements crackled overhead. Amid the chaos stood Madeline Harper, a striking figure of confidence and control. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer and sleek heels, Madeline exuded the aura of someone who had worked hard for her success. Her golden hair, perfectly coiled into a bun, framed her sharp green eyes, which scanned the crowd with a mixture of impatience and quiet judgment. She had little tolerance for inefficiency, and the bustling terminal was testing her limits. When the announcement for first-class boarding finally came, Madeline let out a quiet sigh of relief. Straightening her posture, she strode toward the gate, heels clicking against the polished floor. As she passed the crowded economy line, she caught glimpses of the passengers, worn faces, messy luggage, and mismatched outfits. "It's why I work so hard," she reminded herself, "so I don't have to deal with that." Once inside the plane, the first-class cabin welcomed her with its wide leather seats and calm atmosphere. She settled into 3A, carefully stowing her designer handbag and laptop bag in the overhead compartment. Madeline leaned back, exhaling as she opened her email. This was her sanctuary, a space she felt she'd earned through years of grit and determination. Her moment of calm was interrupted when a tall black man in an army uniform stepped into the cabin. His name tag read Andre Wallace, and his presence immediately caught her attention. He moved with quiet confidence, his broad shoulders squared and his posture dignified. Madeline's gaze lingered on him longer than she realized. Her mind raced with questions. Military discount? An upgrade? Or maybe a token gesture from the airline? She glanced at his uniform again, her thoughts drifting to a darker place. And of course, he gets the added bonus of sympathy. A wave of unease rippled through her. Whether she admitted it to herself or not, it wasn't just his uniform that made her feel uncomfortable. It was his skin color. As Andre approached, Madeline stiffened. When he stopped at the seat beside hers, 3B, her discomfort became palpable. "Excuse me, ma'am," Andre said politely, gesturing to his seat. Madeline forced a smile, moving her knees slightly to let him pass. "Of course," she murmured, her tone clipped. As he settled into his seat, she turned back to her phone, trying to focus on her emails. But her thoughts raced. First class? Really? How does someone like him afford this? She didn't dwell on what she meant by someone like him. The thought came so naturally that she barely noticed it. As Andre adjusted himself in the seat, Madeline found herself glancing at him again. His uniform was spotless, his boots polished to a shine. He radiated an aura of calm strength that, for reasons she couldn't quite articulate, irritated her. She clenched her jaw as the flight attendant approached with a tray of drinks. "Can I get you anything, Sergeant?" the attendant asked, her voice warm and deferential. "And thank you for your service." Andre gave a polite smile. "Just water, thank you." Madeline's grip on her phone tightened. She watched the interaction with growing annoyance. Of course, special treatment. Everyone always trips over themselves for the uniform. She glanced down at her phone, pretending to scroll, but her thoughts burned with resentment. When the flight attendant turned to Madeline, her smile faltered slightly. "And for you, ma'am, just water," Madeline said curtly, barely meeting her gaze. She angled her phone screen toward the attendant, making sure her inbox filled with urgent emails was visible, a subtle reminder of her importance. As the plane began to taxi, the cabin settled into a calm hum. Madeline tried to focus on her work, but the presence of the man beside her gnawed at her. She caught herself glancing at him out of the corner of her eye, her thoughts swirling with unspoken judgments. Does he even belong here? She wondered. She knew she shouldn't think that way, but the thought had already taken root. The plane climbed steadily into the clouds, leaving the bustling airport behind. In the first-class cabin, the atmosphere was quiet, save for the faint clink of glasses as flight attendants offered pre-departure beverages. Madeline leaned back in her seat, earbuds in, trying to lose herself in music. But she couldn't ignore the man sitting beside her. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed him pulling something from his jacket pocket, a small photograph. It was a picture of a young girl, maybe 9 years old, with bright eyes and a radiant smile. She wore a soccer uniform, her hair tied back with a sparkly headband. The sight of the photograph sparked an unexplainable irritation in Madeline. "Cute kid," she said flatly, her tone devoid of warmth. Andre turned, meeting her gaze with a polite smile. "Thank you. That's my daughter, Ariana." Madeline raised an eyebrow. "Traveling to see her?" she asked, her voice teetering on disinterest. "No, ma'am," Andre replied. "She's in the hospital in Atlanta." Madeline stiffened slightly. Of course, a hospital story, she thought, suppressing an eye roll. "That must be hard," she said, her voice clipped. Andre's expression softened, though his gaze held a quiet strength. "It is," he said simply. "But she's strong, stronger than most adults I know." Madeline nodded curtly, turning back to her phone. She told herself the conversation was over, but the man's calm demeanor unsettled her. Her thoughts began to spiral. Why is he in first class? Does he even belong here? She felt a pang of guilt for the thought, but it was quickly buried under layers of rationalization. It's not about race, she reassured herself, though deep down she knew that wasn't entirely true. It's about principles, about earning your place. The flight attendant returned, offering lunch choices, salmon or pasta. Madeline ordered the salmon, pairing it with a glass of Chardonnay. Andre declined alcohol, opting for water instead. The flight attendant smiled warmly at him. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant. Please let us know if you need anything." Madeline bristled. She couldn't stop herself this time. "Don't you ever get tired of people fawning over you just because you're wearing a uniform?" she asked, her voice sharp and cutting. Andre's brow furrowed slightly, but his tone remained measured. "I don't ask for it," he said simply. Madeline leaned back, crossing her arms. "Really? Because it sure seems like everyone goes out of their way for you." Andre set down his fork, turning to face her fully. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of steel beneath his words. "Ma'am, I've spent years serving this country, sacrificing time with my family and risking my life. If some people choose to show their gratitude, that's their choice. But I'm not here for handouts." The firmness in his voice caught Madeline off guard. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She glanced at the photo of Ariana again, a pang of discomfort twisting in her chest. But instead of addressing it, she doubled down. "Must be nice to get upgraded to first class," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for him to hear. Andre's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to her bait. Instead, he turned his attention back to his meal, his silence a more powerful response than any words could have been. Madeline felt a flicker of shame, but she quickly pushed it down. "I'm just being honest," she told herself. "Not everyone who wears a uniform deserves special treatment." When the plane landed at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Madeline was one of the first to unbuckle her seatbelt. She gathered her belongings quickly, eager to put distance between herself and Andre. She refused to meet his gaze as she maneuvered into the aisle, her heels clicking against the carpeted floor. As she stepped into the terminal, she felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, she thought, back to reality. But as she made her way toward baggage claim, she overheard Andre's voice. He was on the phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. "Yes, Miss Carter," he said. "I'll be at the hospital soon." The words echoed in her mind, unsettling her. She tried to shake it off. "Not my business," she reminded herself. She checked her watch and quickened her pace, already thinking about the conference and the big presentation that awaited her. Later that evening, in the comfort of her luxurious hotel room, Madeline sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone. She skimmed news articles, trying to relax after a long day of travel. A headline caught her attention. "Local Army Sergeant's daughter fighting for her life. Community rallies for support." Curiosity piqued. She clicked on the article. The story detailed the struggles of Sergeant Andre Wallace, who had returned to the U.S. on emergency leave to be with his 9-year-old daughter, Ariana. Ariana, the article explained, was battling a life-threatening heart condition and needed a specialized surgery that wasn't fully covered by military insurance. Madeline's stomach twisted as she read further. The article included a photo of Ariana in a hospital bed, her bright smile now dimmed by exhaustion. Tubes and wires surrounded her fragile body, and her father's hand rested gently on hers. Words like insurance gap and experimental procedure leapt off the screen, each one landing like a blow. Her mind flashed back to the plane, to the scathing remarks she'd made. Her accusations about Andre not earning his place. Her irritation at the deference shown to him. A wave of shame crashed over her, leaving her breathless. Madeline stared at her phone, her chest tightening. She didn't want to admit it, but the truth was clear. She had been wrong. Deeply, painfully wrong. Madeline sat frozen on the edge of the hotel bed, her eyes locked on the image of Ariana on her phone. The girl's bright smile, now dulled by illness, lingered in her mind. The words in the article swirled together. Life-threatening condition, insurance gaps, fundraiser. She glanced at the accompanying link to the fundraiser page. The goal was $150,000. The current amount raised was just shy of $40,000. Her heart pounded. This can't be real, she thought, trying to push away the guilt that had settled like a weight on her chest. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the memories of her own cruel words on the plane. She had dismissed Andre as undeserving, belittled his sacrifices, and questioned his presence in first class, all while he was racing to be with his daughter, who was fighting for her life. Madeline set her phone down, rubbing her temples. I can't just sit here. Before she could second-guess herself, she reopened the fundraiser link. She hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the donation button. Finally, she typed in $10,000, a substantial but one she could afford without impacting her lifestyle. She clicked Submit and watched as the confirmation page popped up, her name displayed prominently as the latest donor. For a moment, relief washed over her. She had done something to help. But as quickly as it came, the feeling faded. Money doesn't erase what I said, what I thought. The weight of her guilt remained, pressing against her ribs like a vice. The next morning, Madeline woke early, her mind still racing. She had barely slept, her thoughts consumed by Ariana's story. After a quick breakfast, she left a note for her conference team, saying she'd be tied up with personal matters for a few hours. Guided by the address on the fundraiser page, she drove a rented sedan to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, the hospital where Ariana was being treated. The sprawling campus was bright and colorful, with murals of cartoon animals and cheerful signs pointing to different wings. But the cheerful atmosphere did little to ease Madeline's anxiety. She felt wildly out of place as she approached the front desk. "I'm here to see Ariana Wallace," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The receptionist glanced up. "Are you family?" she asked. Madeline hesitated. "No, I'm a friend," she said awkwardly. The words felt hollow. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, but eventually directed her to the pediatric cardiac ICU on the third floor. As Madeline navigated the hallways, the antiseptic smell and the faint beeping of monitors made her chest tighten. She felt a pang of nervousness as she approached the room, marked 3112. Through the glass window, she saw Andre standing by a small hospital bed. His posture was rigid, his shoulders tense as he leaned over Ariana, who lay surrounded by machines. Her small body looked even smaller beneath the hospital blankets. An oxygen tube was taped below her nose, and monitors beeped steadily nearby. Madeline knocked softly on the doorframe. Andre turned, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw her. "Miss Harper?" he said, his voice a mixture of confusion and caution. "Didn't expect to see you here." Madeline stepped inside, her palms sweating. "I read about Ariana in the news," she stammered. "I wanted to check on her. And on you." Andre's expression was unreadable as he studied her face. "I appreciate that," he said carefully. "But I'm still trying to figure out why you're here." Madeline swallowed hard. "I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice trembling. "For the way I acted on the plane. I said things, thought things, that were unfair. I didn't realize," she trailed off, glancing at Ariana. "I didn't realize what you were going through." Andre's face softened slightly, but his tone remained guarded. "You were pretty harsh," he said quietly. "But I guess that's your choice to make. However, it did sting to feel dismissed like that, like I didn't belong." Madeline's throat tightened. "I know," she said softly. "I'm not proud of it. I made a donation to the fundraiser, but I know that's not enough. I wanted to come here and say I'm sorry, and to see if there's anything else I can do to help." Andre's gaze lingered on her for a moment before he nodded. "Ariana's been through a lot," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. and this surgery is her best shot. It's why I'm here, fighting every day for her." Madeline nodded, her heart aching as she looked at Ariana's small, fragile form. "She's strong," she said quietly, "just like her dad." Over the next few days, Madeline found herself drawn deeper into Ariana's story. Despite her busy conference schedule, she made time to visit the hospital, bringing small gifts for Ariana: a coloring book, a stuffed animal, a set of fairy tale storybooks. At first, Ariana was shy around her, but as the visits continued, she began to open up. "You're funny," Ariana said one afternoon, giggling at one of Madeline's stories about her own childhood mishaps. "I like having you here." Madeline smiled, her heart swelling with an unfamiliar warmth. "I like being here," she admitted. Andre watched these interactions with quiet appreciation. Though he remained cautious, he began to trust Madeline's intentions as she continued to show up, not just for Ariana, but for him. She helped him navigate the labyrinth of hospital paperwork and insurance hurdles, using her organizational skills to simplify the process. One day, as they sat together in the waiting room, Andre turned to her. "I don't know why you're doing all this," he said, "but I'm grateful." Madeline looked at him, her expression earnest. "I'm doing it because I care," she said, "and because I was wrong about you. About a lot of things." Andre nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Well," he said, "thank you for being here. It means more than you know." The day of Ariana's surgery arrived like a thunderstorm on the horizon, anticipated, yet heavy with dread. Madeline woke early, skipping breakfast as she drove to the hospital. The halls were quieter than usual, the staff moving with a sense of purpose as they prepared for the high-risk operation. Andre was already in the waiting room when she arrived, his hands clasped tightly as he sat in a stiff plastic chair. He looked up when he saw her, exhaustion etched into his face. "Morning," he said, his voice low. "Morning," Madeline replied, sitting down beside him. She placed a hand on his arm briefly, unsure if the gesture would be welcome. "How's Ariana?" "She's scared," Andre admitted, "but she's pretending she's not. She doesn't want me to worry." His voice cracked slightly, and he looked away, blinking rapidly. "I told her she doesn't have to be strong all the time, but that's just who she is." Madeline felt a lump in her throat. "She gets that from you," she said softly. Andre didn't respond, but his shoulders relaxed slightly. A nurse appeared at the door moments later, gesturing for him. "We're ready to take her in, Mr. Wallace. You can come say goodbye before we take her to the OR." Andre stood, his movements heavy, and Madeline followed him down the hall. Inside the pediatric surgical ward, Ariana lay in a hospital bed, clutching a small teddy bear that Madeline had given her. Her eyes lit up when she saw her dad. "Hi, Daddy," she said, her voice faint but cheerful. Andre leaned down, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Hey, sweetheart, how are you feeling?" "Nervous," Ariana admitted, clutching the teddy bear tighter. Then she smiled. "But I'm strong, right?" "You're the strongest person I know," Andre said, his voice thick with emotion. He kissed her forehead, and she giggled softly. Madeline approached the bed cautiously. "Hi, Ariana," she said, forcing a smile. "You're going to do great. You've got all these doctors and nurses taking care of you, and your dad's here too." Ariana nodded, her gaze steady. "And you'll be here too, right?" she asked. Madeline's breath caught. "Of course," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'll be right here." The nurse returned, explaining that it was time to take Ariana to the operating room. Madeline watched as Andre bent down to kiss his daughter one last time. "I love you, Kay," he whispered. "I love you too, Daddy," Ariana replied, her voice barely a whisper. She glanced at Madeline and gave her a small wave. "Bye, Miss Madeline." "Bye, sweetheart," Madeline said, blinking back tears. "We'll see you soon." The hours in the waiting room felt endless. Andre paced back and forth, his hands clenched into fists. Madeline sat in a corner, staring at the clock on the wall, silently willing it to move faster. The tension in the room was suffocating. "You okay?" she asked Andre after a while, breaking the silence. He shook his head, stopping to lean against the wall. "I've faced combat zones. I've been in situations where I didn't know if I'd make it out alive. But this..." He trailed off, his voice shaking. "This is harder than anything I've ever done." Madeline stood and crossed the room, placing a hand on his shoulder. "She's going to be okay," she said, her voice firm. "She's strong, and she has you." Andre turned to her, his eyes glistening. "And you," he said quietly, "you didn't have to be here. But you are. That means a lot. Madeline nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She matters, she said simply. And so do you. After what felt like an eternity, the surgeon appeared in the doorway. He looked tired, but there was a small, relieved smile on his face. The surgery went well, he announced. We were able to repair the defect. She's stable, but the next 24 hours are critical. We'll keep a close eye on her. Andre let out a shaky breath, his shoulders sagging in relief. He buried his face in his hands, his body trembling with silent sobs. Madeline felt tears streaming down her own cheeks as she placed a comforting hand on his back. She did it, Andre whispered, his voice choked with emotion. My little girl did it. Ariana's recovery was slow, but steady. In the days following the surgery, Madeline visited the hospital daily, often bringing small gifts or snacks for Andre. She read bedtime stories to Ariana while Andre took breaks, stepping outside for fresh air or coffee. As Ariana regained her strength, she began to joke and laugh again. Miss Madeline, you're the coolest grown-up friend ever, she declared one evening, grinning from ear to ear. Madeline's heart swelled at the words. And you're the bravest kid I've ever met, she replied. Meanwhile, Madeline began reflecting on her own journey. She realized how deeply ingrained her biases had been, not just against Andre, but against anyone she deemed undeserving. The experience with Ariana and Andre had cracked open something inside her, forcing her to confront parts of herself she had long ignored. She sought therapy to unpack her prejudices, determined to become a better person. Months later, Ariana was discharged from the hospital. Her health was improving, and though she still had a long road ahead, her prognosis was hopeful. On the day of her discharge, Andre invited Madeline to a family barbecue at his aunt's house in Decatur, Georgia. Madeline hesitated at first, unsure if she'd fit in, but when she arrived, she was greeted with warmth and gratitude. Andre's extended family welcomed her like one of their own. Seated at a picnic table, Madeline watched as Andre taught Ariana how to toss a foam football. The ball wobbled, but Ariana's laughter filled the air as she tried again. For the first time in years, Madeline felt truly at peace. Looking back, she thought about how much had changed since that fateful flight. What had started as an encounter steeped in prejudice had become a journey of redemption, compassion, and personal growth. Andre caught her gaze and smiled, mouthing a silent thank you. Madeline smiled back, her heart full. She had come a long way, and she wasn't done yet. In the months that followed, Madeline's life took a turn she hadn't expected. Her experiences with Andre and Ariana had opened her eyes to the biases she had carried for years, biases she was no longer willing to ignore. Determined to make meaningful change, she began using her corporate platform to advocate for underserved communities. Her company, initially skeptical, was swayed by her passion and persistence. Under her leadership, they launched a philanthropic initiative aimed at supporting military families with healthcare needs, particularly those facing insurance challenges. She poured herself into the work, finding a sense of fulfillment that had eluded her in the corporate rat race. Madeline also stayed close to Andre and Ariana. She visited regularly, bringing books for Ariana and offering help whenever Andre needed it. Their relationship, once marked by tension and misunderstanding, had grown into a deep bond rooted in mutual respect and care. One day, as she watched Ariana playing at a park near their home in Decatur, Andre turned to her. You know, he said, his voice thoughtful, I used to think people didn't change, that once someone showed you who they were, that was it. Madeline raised an eyebrow. And now? Andre smiled. Now I know they can. You proved that. Madeline looked at him, her chest tightening with emotion. I had a lot to learn, she admitted, but I'm glad I did. You and Ariana, you changed my life too. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Madeline realized how far she had come. Not just in her relationship with Andre and Ariana, but in her understanding of herself and the world around her. She wasn't the same person who had boarded that plane months ago, full of unacknowledged prejudice and entitlement. She was someone better, someone who had learned the true meaning of empathy, humility, and human connection. As this heartfelt journey comes to an end, we want to hear from you. What did you think of Madeline's transformation and the bond she built with Andre and Ariana? Did her story inspire you to reflect on the biases we all carry and the power of redemption? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you so much for watching and being part of this incredible story. Your support means everything to us. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss more stories like this. We'll see you next time with another tale that moves, inspires, and makes us think. Take care and stay compassionate.